Well, we're good now, and you have a beautifully colored shirt.
Well, this is my uniform. So my spiritual self coming to the
Looks great. Yeah, I got my logger shirt on.
Yeah, well, natural, okay. Light worker in the street look.
You're right. Foot soldier, they call him, right?
Yep.
Okay, so in one of our earlier exchanges, I had the impression that this might be multi-part, which kind of got me excited because when I got your report, it was dense and there was a lot, there's a lot of information on there, which I love. So I have your report here. So first of all, I was hoping that you would just kind of tell me what your intentions are for this, because I'm going to kind of lean towards that rather than any agendas I have.
Okay. Yeah, I thought what might be a good introduction, since we've really not talked at any length, would be for me to talk about what I do and my main goals, my objectives, to give a sense of who I am and what I care about and what I'm involved with, and so what I have developed as an expertise. And to do that, it would be instructive for me to share some examples of things I've worked on, things I've worked on with people over the last week or so.
Okay.
Because I've had a few interesting clients that illustrate different phenomena that come up again and again and again with people. And they also speak to the wider picture of what's going on with the world, what's wrong with the world, and what's behind that. And I'm sure that will be of interest to you as well, because it impinges on some of the other things you've done, the people you've interfaced with to get their stories and their knowledge about ETEs, for example. Mm-hmm. So the major focus for me is on the spirit realm. And the interesting thing about it is, and the main message I really want to get out to the world, is that this is not something to be discounted or dismissed. This is a major source of negativity, and it's also behind what's going on with the negative extraterrestrials.
Okay.
This is something I don't know that anyone has really perceived as yet. This may be information new to the planet for all I know. And I don't make attempts to become a scholar of all the stuff that's out there. There's just so much, and much of it is misinformation and disinformation, deliberate misinformation. So I don't have time. I'm busy helping people. So I know what I've experienced and witnessed.
Right.
And it all kind of converges. So I get information from a variety of sources, and when I see this convergence, then it becomes convincing.
Right.
Because I'll stumble on it working on a person and looking at their Akashic records or dealing with something in their karmic history that they're working on or struggling with in their current life. And it might bring in one of those bad actors.
Okay.
And so here it comes again. And so it's another data point in this tapestry. So we're really working against a kind of an evil force. So I'm kind of, I think of myself as sort of a lone warrior out there. I know there are many others like myself who are working in these issues and in the arena and doing different things, in a way. A lot of hands-on healers know about spirits and they'll remove them and this sort of thing. But there is a huge confluence of what I call happy talk in the spiritual community. A lot of emphasis focused on raising your vibration and using the law of attraction and expecting things to be different and setting those intentions, and everything is going to be fine. And when I come along and I see how people are actually living and suffering, even when they try to apply those principles, it only carries them just so far. There are deeper issues needing healing, and that isn't going to do it. Just setting an intention isn't going to do it, because the driving force are the inner conflicts within the subconscious. Right. And unless you get down and deal with that, it's not going to be enough.
Yeah, I had a
So
poignant reminder of that.
Sort of a bull in a china shop. And I admit this, and I'm just kind of warning you up front that because I work with so many things that are dark, a lot of what I talk about is dark, and not everyone wants to go there. I understand that, and it's not for everyone because some people are fragile.
Right.
And they're sensitive, and they have enough to worry about, and that's fine. I wish them well.
Right.
But if people truly want to understand why things are happening the way they are in life today, they need to grapple with the kind of issues I deal with. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I can share some things to give you my perspective on why I'm saying that, and real-world examples of things that I've done. And it also kind of illustrates what I can do as a practitioner as well, because I'm also interested in reaching out to help others and attracting new clients, because everyone has stuff, everyone has things that they need to work on and help themselves advance. And I'm working from the heart, and I'm working for the divine realm in all that I do, and I'm totally committed to that. And I mostly don't want to cause harm. I'm always walking this tightrope, wanting to enlighten, to inform, to help people learn and grow in understanding what they're really facing. Because I think without the information, we're really lost, and we're stumbling in the dark until we really see what the problems are.
Right.
But in the process, it can stir things up. It can scare people and alarm them, and so I'm always doing this little dance of trying to sort of wake people up, but not contribute to their fears to such an extent that it makes things worse.
Right.
So I don't know how to be perfect at that. I do the best I can. So
right. Well, I have a little thing that I
to have some balance to it. So it's not just darkness. That there needs to be an awareness that there are solutions for these things, and that's the good news.
Right.
I might bring new things to worry about to people, but they come with an answer. We can get divine help to deal with all of these things.
Right. Yeah, I have a little thing that I put on my card. It says reveal and forgive. And then, that's an ongoing process, like you're only going to reveal things that you're ready to forgive. Generally speaking, most of us in our life path aren't going to be confronted with something that's insurmountable. Usually we can, but that does take some bravery and some ability to accept things out of the norm, perhaps initially. But like you say, we have help, and from what I've seen lately, that help is monumental. It's pretty impressive, and as evidenced by the work that you did with me, that created a huge change in my life. Which prompted me to want to do this interview. And I'm also doing one with Vidya, who was the person who recommended me to you. So, all right.
Wonderful.
So,
I love getting that feedback, by the way, and I so appreciate you for doing that and taking the time to do it. And hopefully this will be a win-win and cooking something up that will help you in your efforts to reach people and provide useful information.
Yeah, I don't have any doubts about that. This is definitely going to be a win-win. Even if we stopped right now, it would be a win-win. So why don't you tell us one of your recent episodes, maybe with one of your clients in general terms of, to kind of give us a flavor of what you're talking about.
Okay, well, basically, I have morphed into a type of healer that does a lot of remote work. I reach out to people from a distance and work with them intuitively to scan them for a series of issues that I have learned are important. And then I work directly with the creator of all that is to take negativity away, to make adjustments to the person, to bring in divine healing, to do karmic repair of issues from their past that might be rumbling and causing discord in their lives. And this can be done completely without the awareness of the person. It can be gifted to help someone who's troubled within a family. So I do a lot of this kind of work. I do a lot of work reaching out to people's family members who are struggling, to children and even babies, to people who are in very distressing circumstances, hospitalizations, imprisons, because everyone who's struggling is grappling with a dark set of issues of one sort or another. And often it's emotional, coming from past karma, life experience. But often there's an overlay of negativity coming from outside sources, external sources of consciousness. And the biggest perpetrator in that is a cohort of dark spirits. These are what people call demons, if you will, demonic spirits. I don't use that term because it adds more fear and more power to them than they really have. They're basically bullies who pick on people and exploit their weakness. And they have the power we give them, and that's it. So if we're vulnerable and weak, they can move in. It's that simple. If we stand up to them and we get divine help to stand up to them, they can't win. And they're easy to deal with for the most part. So one of the problems is people have no idea this is going on. I mean, how many people have you ever heard talk about having spirit attachments removed from them? Oh, I feel better this week because, I started feeling rotten last week. And so I called my go-to person and they did a remote spirit releasement. And boy, that turned things around and I feel lighter. And I was under a cloud for a time there. You don't hear that.
Right.
And the reason is we've lost touch with the fact this is a reality. So if you go back to works like the Bible, it's all through the Bible. They talk about spirits. They talk about the fallen angels, the war in heaven. That's where these beings came from. They are a non-human light being that turned away from love and light and lost most of their power. But they're out there, and they're not visible to the eye. But they know us intimately. They've been around for eons. They know humans. They know how to push their buttons. They know how to manipulate them. And they're basically after our energy. They use us like a battery. They stir up negative emotion, and that's what they want. They want that negative emotional energy, and they tap that to live on. And they're also working against love and light, and there's a whole history behind that and their agenda and so on. But they're misguided, they're misinformed themselves, they're purposely being misdirected to fear the light when they really shouldn't, because they can be rescued. But right now, they're extremely aggressive in working against anything positive. And so they can get into people during low emotional moments. There's a whole set of risk factors for this. So people have no idea this goes on, but it's been around forever, and it's talked about in all cultures pretty much.
Right.
There's been an awareness that things happen, and then after you die, there's a kind of place you can go that's not so nice. And people have different terms for it. Purgatory, hell, these are concepts it's coming from an awareness that we're not done when our body dies. There's a part that lives on, and this is true. We are immortal light beings. And one of the sad things is that not everyone makes it to the light when they die. We think, this is like the big escape. There's a lot of people who are looking forward to their passing. They're fed up. They're maybe struggling with chronic illness. They're beaten down by life. Maybe they've had divorces and they were abused, and their circle just kind of narrows and narrows, and they may not make it to the light if they're in a very, very negative frame of mind, because they're not a vibrational match to that. They may not see the light callers who always come. And so what I've been told by the divine realm is that 30 to 40% of people are lost souls, meaning they already hold the vibration of someone who is lost, meaning they can't really connect to the higher astral plane. They don't have that potential. They've lost it for a time at least. They need to be lifted up. They need healing to get them back into a road-ready mode. And it's very likely that when their physical body dies, they won't make a full transition. They'll stay earthbound. All right, so here's some facts and figures about this. I already told you at least a third of people are prone or likely to have that experience of being trapped between planes when they die. That creates a huge cohort of human lost soul spirits wandering around. Most of those attached to living people. And they drag them down because energetically they're troubled. Their awareness is limited. They're still struggling with the emotions of their prior life existence. They're caught in time. They may not even realize they're dead. It sounds bizarre. I've channeled many of these spirits and talked to them and heard their stories, felt their emotions. They're in a state of torment, basically. So to have that kind of energy inside you is not a good thing because it'll rub off. And some of these spirits team up with the darker ones, the fallen spirit meddlers, I call them, the demonic types. And when a human spirit teams up, I call that a hybrid, because they take on that mantle of darkness and they become exploited and entrained and programmed by the really dark spirits to serve them. So when you have a hybrid with a group of spirit meddlers, and they're always present in a group, almost always, they gang up on a person. And that can be a very severe situation to cause all sorts of trouble for the person's life. They interfere with relationships. They will block careers, help people fail at whatever they want to do. They'll start early. They go into babies and young children. They want to get in early and start to take them down. This is very diabolical, but I assure you it is real. So they're a major source of developmental delays in kids. They're a major source of all sorts of difficulties children have. Night terrors, trouble sleeping, problems with memory and learning, physical problems, bedwetting. Anything they can do to impinge the nervous system, to throw something out of whack, they'll make the attempt. So a lot of these difficulties in growth and becoming strong and becoming a healthy psyche is being acted against by these dark spirits. So this is not a rare thing. So if there's one take-home message that I would give people is there's a 90% chance that you have dark spirit meddlers in you. 90%. 9 out of 10 people you know have these in place. They may have been there for many, many years, chipping away at the person, triggering past karmic difficulties to come up and worry the subconscious. This is one of their tricks. So when I work on someone, it's very likely I'll find these beings. And about a third of people have one of the hybrids, a human spirit who's really turned dark. A smaller percentage have just an odd lost soul or more than one that just happen to find a way to attach to them as a safe haven. Sometimes there's a past karmic reason for that. So let me give you a few examples of the dynamics of this. One thing that I just finished, so it's fresh in my mind, was a family group I did. A woman contacted me. A lot of difficulties with her family. Everyone is kind of struggling with one sort of issue or another. And even their home did not feel good energetically. And she was real worried about that. They had all sorts of problems in their home. Things breaking, trees falling on the home, water leaks and water damage. The place just felt bad, felt creepy. And she's worried, frankly, about being able to sell it. And of course, so many things have gone wrong. You know, it's hard to put a happy face on the history of the place. So she had 2 young kids. One of them was, like a early grade schooler. The other one was still a toddler. So there is a mix of issues when people struggle with life. The thing I most want to do is remove any dark spirit influences, because no one else is doing that. No other modality will take care of this. Medicine doesn't address it. Most alternative healing doesn't address it unless you go in specifically to work on that problem. You'll just skirt around that. And if you leave that in place, even if you scrub a person up energetically, they can come right back in and undo that, stir up new difficulty and new energetic discord in the person, so things don't get better in the long term. So I worked on this family. And so here are some of the things that I found. First of all, they all had spirit meddler attachments, every one of them. The woman who hired me, her husband, and the 2 children. And it turned out that the husband had a hybrid. So he had a human spirit who was working with this group of spirit meddlers specifically. And one of the things that I look at when there's a hybrid in place is to see if there's a karmic tie to the host. And by that I mean there's a past history. Oftentimes what happens is when you have a run-in with someone and there's bad blood, you may go back to the light and reincarnate again. But that enemy of yours might not make it if they're a really troubled person. Maybe a serious criminal or, a sociopathic personality type individual who is not a vibrational match to the higher astral. They may stay as an earthbound spirit then. But one of the things I see, and it's very common, is those earthbound spirits will find former victims and come and attach to them and work with the spirit meddlers to continue the vendetta and continue to try to undermine their old enemy, even though they're in a new lifetime now. So we think when we die, if you believe in an afterlife, you go to heaven, everything is wonderful, everything gets healed. And if you believe in reincarnation, well, you certainly will come back as a shiny new penny and you get to start fresh. And there's a whole wide set of possibilities and you just get better and better and better. Well, I hate to burst this bubble, but it ain't so. Reincarnation is the paradigm, and there's tons of information about that. I give a whole lecture about this when I work with people. I have a meetup group where I give a series of talks on metaphysics and spirituality and some of these phenomena. And there's just tons of evidence out there. Many books have been written, accounts of past lives people have remembered and proven through historical records and archival newspaper accounts and so on that are just so arcane and deeply buried that they couldn't be faking. And so when I work on people, this is routine for me. When I look at them intuitively and look at their issues, I can ask Creator to show me the point of origin of a problem. And what I'll be shown is something from their Akashic record. And it's usually a past life circumstance or issue. And I see it like a little movie play out. And I'll see, it's an earlier era, or certainly something not yet experienced by the person. Like if I'm working on a child and I see a past life where they're an adult person, that's not from their current life. It's a past lifetime. So I can see the point of origin of things in that fashion. So this family I'm working on, this hybrid's in the dad. And I asked to see the point of origin of the karmic tie, if any, between them. And I saw there was a karmic tie. And in a past lifetime, these two had a real go-round and were serious, serious enemies. And this hybrid hated my client in that past life. And now he's back. And one of the things that was going on is he was not only in that person and trying to do things through the nervous system, through the thoughts of my client, impulsing them with negativity and so on. He was also sending high-level curses against him. Curses are real. They do have an energy. They're an aspect of our consciousness. We have more power than we think when we put our minds to it. And those curses were going out against his entire family because this hybrid lost soul spirit had suffered so because of my client in a past life, or felt he had. He wanted to destroy everything important to my client, which meant his family and even his home. So when I worked on the location, which is very much like a person, by the way, I use the same healing protocol on a location as I use for a person, because locations have the same issues. The land itself has a soul, so there could be soul damage. There are all kinds of energetic things that can go wrong in a location, just like with a person. There are karmic histories for a location, just like with a person. There can be a loss and an exchange of soul fragments between the land and people. There are elementals that are guardians of the land, and they come into play as well in working on a location. But things like curses can interfere with a location and its health and cause problems. And the dark spirits use things like curses as like a carrier wave, and they can ride in on a curse energy and get inside a person who's been targeted. So these things are all significant. So as I worked on each of those individuals, I saw how the hybrid was influencing them. So the children who were having developmental delays and problems, emotional problems and so on, I saw that the curse energy was a factor. And one of the interesting things is in doing karmic repair, it was shown to me that these children were in past lives with that hybrid, just like the dad. So, for example, there was a lifetime where this hybrid spirit was their older brother of my current client's, the father, and the two sons were brothers. They were all brothers in that particular life, and the hybrid was an older brother, so there's 4 of them. And what I was shown is there was a karmic contract, which is a trauma needing healing, that they were all carrying from this particular lifetime. And what had happened was that I was shown this hybrid, who was really a bad seed, an evil, corrupted, dark person, probably because of spirit attachments, making him that way. He set his brother's nightshirt on fire with a candle, behind him. And he didn't realize it for a time. And then the whole thing was in flames, and he got severely burned. So one of this man's children in his current life was the kid in that past life. You see, this is a family unit traveling from life to life together. And now one of the family members is stuck as an earthbound spirit, and he's come back to be part of the family again through attaching. This is weird, but I tell you, it's not at all uncommon. You can have an enemy you don't know about inside of you, or a fellow family member. So that boy, clearly was traumatized by what happened. He was severely burned, suffered greatly at the hands of his brother. And the youngest brother in the current family was a witness to that in that same past life. And he carried the burden of knowing what had happened and was afraid to tell. It was written off as an accident because it was done from behind, and the brother who was burned didn't really know that it was an intentional thing. He thought he got too close to the candle. But the other brother did know. And so he's carrying that burden of guilt and the shame and the fear. So now he's in a new life, shiny new penny, right? Except the old, evil, older brother is back. He's back in town. And he's cursing that little boy, stirring up trouble. And what I saw was the curse energy is responsible for the inroads that these spirits were making to cause physical problems. He's having trouble with his locomotion, with his standing. He's developmentally behind. So spirits are a major cause of school dropouts and learning disabilities and the bad things that happen. Where do these kids come from who torture other children? We're light beings. Where does that come from? How do we get from being a light being, we're in a fresh new body, fresh new start, and now we're torturing another kid, a weaker kid? Why does that happen? How does that come about? And yeah, you can trace certain things. Some are bullied at home by parents and so on, or older siblings, and then they carry that through in their own behavior. But where does that come from? Some of it can be karmic, past experience and learning, but some of it is the influence of these spirits that get in. It's a huge factor. There's a 90% chance that this is going on in everyone, and children included. They are the cause of criminality. They're the cause of most of the darkness that happens on the planet, including all the things that happen on a global scale. So it's at all levels, the personal, the interpersonal, the community level, the national level. They're a factor in politics and in warfare. They are a huge force, and they work in coordination with one another. It's a kind of a loosely organized thing, but they can act in concert. They can recruit their fellows to take action against someone who helps undermine their own person they're infesting. So they're a huge cause of divorce. They get the husband and wife both going, and the meddlers within the two of them conspire to create more discord and push one another's buttons and do the very worst thing at the very worst time. So I know this is very dark and very creepy, but it is real. And the answer is to bring in a divine realm. These spirits can be removed. This is what I do professionally to help people. Some are easy to remove, some are more difficult. If there's a karmic tie, you need to do a lot of healing first. And a lot of people who do spirit removals don't take those steps. And so some will not be removed. And the divine realm can't do a thing if there's a karmic tie involved, because it's free will. So the divine realm can only do what we ask or we allow, because we're in charge here. And that's the other part of our dilemma. We have this blessing of free agency and free will, but it also means we're on our own. We can ask for help, and we'll be given help, but there are still rules and boundaries when it comes to others, and including spirits. Even though they might be attacking us, they have rights, they have privileges, just like human criminals. God doesn't come and stop the bullets. Mm-hmm. There might be a divine rescue that keeps someone from being killed, but they may go to the hospital with multiple wounds. So there's a limit to what the divine realm will do unilaterally. If you ask for help, the odds go way, way up that you'll get it. If you don't ask, forget it. You're just cannon fodder. You're going to be here and going around and around and around until you learn that. Mm-hmm. So one of the sad things is right now, of course, society is drifting away from the spiritual roots of history.
Right.
The church and so on, with the increasing secularization. And not that the churches are the answer, because they have their issues. They're a dark force and a corrupted force, like all our institutions, unfortunately.
Right.
But it's better to believe in God and even have some faulty dogma in your thoughts than to not believe at all.
Right.
Because then you don't have that resource.
Right.
So this is an example of a family unit that has a karmic history together. It's very common, very typical. So many of the people in our lives are people we've had dealings with, people at work, neighbors, people in organizations we join. Many times people have past life connections with those who sort of come into their life. in unexpected ways or seemingly ordinary ways. But
Right.
there is a kind of grand plan going on that we're a part of. And the purpose is to learn and grow and evolve beyond it. So what's going on with the shift in consciousness is to get us out from under all of that bad karmic history. And our responsibility is to do what we can to assist in that. I don't believe it can be a totally passive thing. If we just sit around and wait for rescue, I think it's a mistake. I think we have to do our part and do as much as we can to raise ourselves up, to be ready, and to be as best we can at a level that can breach the gap. And then it's going to accelerate. And that's what's going on. We are being assisted. There is a shift in consciousness going on. Many people are being awakened. And I know you've seen this again and again with all the wonderful people you've talked with.
So can you tell us a little bit about addiction, drug use, and maybe from your perspective of what we were calling the disclosure movement, like people coming out from the secret government programs talking about extraterrestrial contact, those kinds of things as it relates to these subjects?
Yes, let me deal with the addiction first, and then I'll talk about the secret government and some of the implications for us and some things that I know about it. There are certain things that it's not wise to talk about too directly,
Right.
but I can share a lot with you, and the main thing is to be aware that it is there and is real. So, because, again, information is a value to help you become aware of the need to be conscious of things and to take steps to improve your safety and take into account the possibilities that might come up where you have to make decisions. So anyway, let's not jump ahead. Let's get back to the drug issue, the addiction issue. One of the interesting things to me as I began exploring this, because I have many clients with these kinds of problems, as you might expect. I get all sorts of people coming to me. Many are deeply troubled. I get a lot of mentally ill people who would be certainly classified that way by the person in the street, as well as the medical people. I have worked with a number of people with diagnosed schizophrenia and so on. And they always have spirit issues because they're wide open. They have no boundaries. They have no ability to defend themselves. And so they're just putty in the hands of these sort of entities, and it makes them much, much worse. And in fact, they get that way because of the spirit meddlers, which is another thing the mainstream really needs to find out about. Yeah, genes may increase susceptibility, but the spirit meddlers can close off the connection to the higher self. And all sorts of bad things happen. And that's where the character disorders come from and so on. So the addictions come in when people are, by and large, having some kind of karmic predisposition. So yes, there might be a genetic component to that. But very likely they have done those sorts of things in past lifetimes. That's why a young kid will go through the pain of being able to tolerate cigarette smoke. Because the subconscious knows they've smoked in a past life and it was wonderful in that past life and they want to do that again. The subconscious is all for it and it'll get them motivated to keep at it and keep at it until they can tolerate it, and then they start to get more benefit than discomfort. It's the same with drinking. Because these have been common in prior generations, there's a karmic predisposition. It's a huge factor. I was surprised at that. The harder drug issue is very much fueled by dark spirits because it's a point of vulnerability for the person. If you use marijuana, for example, you weaken your aura and you open yourself to attack. So there's a wonderful book written first back in the 1950s by a fellow who was in the Army, and got a last minute offer to go to medical school because they were desperate for doctors. It was right at the start of World War II. And he happened to get pneumonia and died. And he left his body and he's going across country because he just had the thought he wanted to go home. He wanted to go home. And he saw lights below, went down, and it was a bar open in the wee hours of the morning. And he saw these people lined up, these Navy men, these sailors lined up at a bar drinking shots. And there were these spirits trying to grab them, but they couldn't. And then he saw a guy get up off the stool and started to teeter and then fell onto the floor, just dead drunk. And the glow around him, which he was seeing with his eye, is an astral projection, as a spirit really now having emerged from the body, ready to transition. He saw that glow fade at the crown of the person's head, and a spirit came and went whoosh into that person. So this is an example of weakened the auric field through alcohol. And this is an eyewitness to spirit possession by a person in spirit form who just happened, fortunately for us, to get the eyewitness account, came back into the body and was revived by the divine realm because there was it wasn't his time.
Right.
So he wrote about this years later, just observing that, just one little segment of his experience. But this is an example of what happens. So these drugs weaken the defenses and promote spirit attachment. And it also makes the person more vulnerable to manipulation while they're under the influence of those agents. And make greater inroads to worsen the person's life, to lower their resolve, their initiative, their independent thinking, on and on and on. They chip away and chip away. And what I've been shown by the divine realm is that the spirits follow all this. They know all about it. They actually follow the drugs from the time they're produced to their points of delivery, to the clients. They actually follow it along, the containers. Why not? This is, okay, let's see where it goes, and then, they can poise and swoop down on those victims. So they'll follow the marijuana that's harvested to the destination. I mean, this is what goes on. So they're a huge risk factor. Now, I know there's medicinal qualities. There are medicinal applications. I was a pharmacologist for many years working on drug discovery research for the pharmaceutical industry. Back in the 70s, we had a project where I was working to look at delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. And we were trying to tease apart some of the myriad physiologic effects and make it more selective and take away the psychogenic effects, so that it wouldn't have addictive or habituating properties that have effects on the cardiovascular system, for example, to lower blood pressure or help the digestive system and so on.
Okay.
So there is an aspect of benefit to these. So I'm not trying to take anybody's benefits away here. And I understand they can be pleasurable, like many things, but there is a risk. So I don't know what else you might want to know about that. But those are kind of the major issues involved with drug use.
Yeah.
There's a risk.
Right. Well, it's
to not do well, or people tend not to do well when they're over imbibing.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was an issue for me, and I haven't decided whether to do this yet, but as part of our interview, I was actually thinking about making portions of the report that you did for me when I had your services, just so people could see an example, use myself as an example as it relates to that issue. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but it's back to the old reveal, forgive thing, and
there's no shame in any of this because we're all human. My goodness. And if people only knew the things they'd done in prior lifetimes, I mean, I am telling you, we've all been in dark corners and in dark places in our mind and corrupted. And this is the thing, we don't get that way because of who we are, our soul. No, this is a corruption that comes from being around the wrong influences. And a lot of it is that spirit cohort. It is. It really, truly is.
Right.
So that's how children can harm others so readily sometimes. They've got a dark spirit in them, pushing them, telling them, oh, get that guy. He deserves it. He's a weakling. Show him how strong you are. Show him how tough you are. We're proud of you. Whoa. Kids are unformed. They have to learn about responsibility and learn about morality.
Right.
Psychologists have described this. Kids are what they call amoral up until they're 5 to 8 years old. They don't really have a concept of morality, but they're inherently curious and loving beings. They're just influenceable. They're manipulable, and that's where the spirits can do harm.
Right.
So it all depends, and some of that is karmic predispositions. So some of the people, when I work on people who are major perpetrators, I'll typically see they do have a karmic history of violence. So they're not able to take someone who's just a really fine person with a long life history of humanitarian work and so on and turn them into a mass killer.
Right.
Not likely to happen. But someone who's been a criminal in past lives or a mass killer in past lives likely has never gotten any healing. They're going to reincarnate too. Free will, free agency. They get to come back. Sorry. They don't get siphoned off into hell. That's a human notion. It ain't so. They might get stuck earthbound, but there's still a risk to us. So capital punishment is a ridiculous notion. All it does is hasten the day when they come back and they're free and they can pick up where they left off. That's all that it does. Okay. So, all right. So you wanted to get a sense of the things that are going on a bigger scale with the secret government and some of the things with extraterrestrial involvement.
Right. We have there's a wave forming of disclosure folks, people who were involved in some of these programs that are now telling their stories. And for whatever reason, these people aren't being silenced. They're able to speak more and more about their experiences. And I was witness to that recently up at the conference up in Mount Shasta with a fellow by the name of Corey Good, and I think his testimony is kind of spurred on others to tell their stories, and so you can kind of feel there's a wave building now of more and more of these people coming out and speaking, because for whatever reason it's a lot safer to do that kind of thing now than it was, say, like 10, 15 years ago.
Well, I think that's true. The question is, what is the tipping point for those forces that might want to be working against disclosure? So I just think it makes sense to be cognizant and consider your audience and consider how much is enough to inform without putting people at risk. There's a certain danger in knowing too much in the way of specific details about things. So I know lots of secrets because of things I've kind of looked into. And because the Akashic records are there, it is possible to learn quite a lot if you work at it. And this is a surprise to the perpetrator, but everything they've ever done is on record and stored forever. So no one's ever going to get away with anything. This is this thing, it's kind of amusing because it's all stored, regardless of whether we want it to be or not. It is all stored, and it's all recorded for posterity. And the big picture is we're all going to be raised up. Even the darkest of the dark eventually will find their way back to the light. And that's what's happening here in this crazy place. We're going through all these challenges and all these struggles and all these counterbalancing and counteracting forces working against the transformation. And it's the vestige of that past history, the past darkness. It doesn't want to give up. It only knows what it knows. And it's getting desperate. And that's kind of why I just feel a little concerned at the moment, because that's when things tend to get more out of hand, when you're at the tipping point.
Right.
Before, everybody's complacent. After, everything's pretty much moving forward and there's nothing more to worry about. So it's right in that flux point that things can get a little hairy. But all right, so let's get into it a little bit. So here's what I've learned in my life about ETs. Okay, just to put this in perspective. I was always curious about the phenomenon, and I'm sure it's because I had an inner knowing that it was real, a deep inner knowing. Many people have had that because they are real. They've been around practically forever in our earth plane. So I happened to see one many years ago. This was back in the early 70s. I came out of my house at 2 in the morning, and there was the classic huge white glowing orb just behind the trees in front of my house. It looked very, very close. It looked like a giant landing light on a 747, except there was no sound. And it tracked along very slow, too slow. And then it made a right angle turn and shot straight into the heavens, into a star-filled night, clear night. And I could just see it go way, way out. It shot up, whoosh, and it was gone. Nothing flies like this. There's no such thing as a right angle turn in aviation, and nothing like a straight takeoff like that, in that fashion, that fast. So then I knew. You see, when you have an experience like that, then you know. So that shaped me a little bit, made me more receptive. And I never thought much about it. I would read the UFO literature just out of curiosity, and I read the stuff about abductions and so on. I was always curious about it. And I figured, it's kind of an odd, unusual thing, not very common. And as I underwent a spiritual awakening and became a hypnotist, because I saw they were able to help people with the subconscious level. And by and large, the psychologists were not addressing that level of the being. And I knew it was important. And I just had an inner sense about this. And my understanding of medicine and everything that I had witnessed in my life showed this to be true. And I saw hypnotists were helping people. And became interested in the phenomenon of past life regressions and so on. And I was just curious about it at first. Didn't necessarily believe it. I thought it might be just power of suggestion and awakening a subpart of the mind that's fanciful, and it creates a nice little story, just like you might have a dream about something, right?
Right.
Plausible, a left brain kind of intellectual assumption, fitting it into what we know, or what we think we know. Okay, so I went to a friend and had a past life regression because I met a person close to me who was channeling an archangel and had some discussions with the archangel. And right at that time, I had just started working on remote spirit releasement. And it was the archangel who told me that this would be a good fit for me. I wasn't planning to really devote much time to it. I thought it was kind of an interesting side. I wanted to help people with emotional issues. That's what I was focused on. And I was learning energy medicine. I was about to sign on at a cancer clinic to do healing touch work with cancer patients and so on, and already feeling kind of overstretched. And here this archangel says, remote spirit releasement is a good fit for you. And not many people are able to do what you do. And not many people are doing it. And the archangel also mentioned, because I was asking about something about a past life, and the archangel said, well, you and your son, who was there in the room, have had some interesting times in Atlantis you might want to take a look at. So I did this. I went to a friend to do a past life regression, and I asked them to direct me to go back to a life I'd had in Atlantis. I didn't know what to expect. And I had not read a lot about Atlantis and so on. And just, occasional people would mention, those early times. And it was, the earth changes came, obliterated. That's about all I knew in ancient civilization. And so, as part of the process, I was directed to go to a time of key importance in that life. And what I saw immediately was this circle, this semicircle of alien grays, extraterrestrials, in a kind of a ceremonial setting. And what I saw in bits and pieces of that lifetime was there was an interaction with these ETs that led to the downfall. Completely unexpected. This had not been put into my mind by anything. I hadn't read any books where people talked about this. So this is how I've come to believe what I know, because I've had direct exposure to the information in unexpected ways, largely from people who don't have a conscious awareness of the information, but have had direct experiences like being abducted and so on. Mm-hmm. I put a lot of value in that because they're not necessarily pushing any agenda.
Right.
They've been victimized, or it's just in their past history.
Right.
Okay? So this has been going on for a long time. This is nothing new. We were corrupted from the earliest beginnings as a light being in a human body, which was engineered with the cooperation of some advanced extraterrestrial beings, largely the Pleiadians and the Syrians. They created us as a semi-synthetic being, using divinely created DNA of light being constructs, but doing some things to help give us some, what they felt would be advantages, tuned to fit this animal body that had pre-existed. And so it was a grand plan to make a new kind of species. And then we were corrupted by Anunnaki, who are beings from another planet, another civilization. And they wanted to downgrade us to become a slave species for their own purposes. So they came in and did that. And we've been fighting to get out from under that. And that's part of the shift in consciousness now, to reawaken the part of our DNA that was essentially turned off. It's largely interdimensional, but it's what has to happen to get us back to full light being status as a physical expression. Right now, we're running on one cylinder, kind of. You know, that's the analogy I'd use. So, all right. So, along the way, other aliens came in to see what was going on here, and they have also attempted to mess with us, to exploit us in various ways. And the biggest players, as I have seen, are the Arcturian Greys. The Greys are a semi-synthetic hybrid species. They are soulless beings. They're a robotic being, and that's all. They're not like a human being, and they're not like any of the other extraterrestrials. They're basically an advanced artificial intelligence. This is a picture of where we're heading, by the way, because our scientists are trying to create this. Mm-hmm. Big mistake, because these beings are smart enough now, they want to be like us, but they can't, and they want to find out how. They've been conducting a huge genetic experiment with us for 100,000 years now, and mostly within the last 25 to 30,000 years, since the fall of Atlantis. That's where it really came to a head the last time. And they're still at it. And that's the purpose behind all these alien abductions that are going on. So another data point in this is when I started doing remote spirit releasement, I started to branch out and see, well, what else could I see in people if I take a look? And I found I could see health issues and so on. And I started looking for all sorts of other phenomena. And then if it was there, I would see it. I would see it symbolically, typically. But it's sort of like learning to turn to a different channel and see if there's a signal. That's basically what you have to do intuitively. You have to kind of tune into that frequency by setting an intention and then kind of scanning. So that's how I do this. And so I would look to see if people had alien implants. And I started finding people who had alien implants in them. And so over a period of time, I compiled statistics on all these different phenomena. And my database is that about 4% of people, Americans, largely, most of my clients are Americans. I do work on other people around the world, but mostly Americans. And it's about 4% is the going rate. So if you do the math, we've got 300 million people in the United States. That means 12 million Americans walking around today have been abducted at least once. That's a huge, huge number. And this is going on worldwide, as I'm sure you're aware. People have reported this everywhere. Mm-hmm. And there's a broad reach. And the reason is this is a huge genetic study. So they're following people from generation to generation to generation and manipulating DNA and experimenting and tinkering with us and seeing what happens. And they're in this for the long haul. And there's also a more sinister aspect because they want to begin to impart measures of control and so on. So these Greys and their creators have a kind of a loose arrangement with the reptilians, who are yet another extraterrestrial species. They are very nasty beings, as the name would suggest, and they do look like the name describes, but they are shapeshifters, so they can assume any shape they desire. They can make a perfect imposter and assume the visage of any human being. And so part of the abduction scenario is for replacement. So they can replace people and have a reptilian step into their life and resume what that person was doing. Take over their fortune, take over their role in society, whether it's in the military or in the government. So there's a very sinister infiltration going on. Along the way, the government took more and more notice of the ETs flying around, and one of the seminal events was in Roswell in 1947. There were other UFO crash landings where debris was recovered and beings recovered. That was one of the most important recent ones because it led to an alliance between the U.S. government and the Greys and the people behind the Greys, including the reptilians. So basically, they came in, offered us a few trinkets, and took over Manhattan, just like the Western Caucasians did with the Native Americans, with promises of learning technology that the military is interested in for space travel, weapons, and so on. They turned a blind eye to the abductions that were going on, and they still are. And they have allowed the fox into the henhouse because now these beings are everywhere at all levels of our institutions, unopposed, setting us up, and mostly undermining us to hold us back. And that's why our institutions across the board are so corrupt. It's not just that there's a secret government, there's a secret everything. I hate to be saying this, and I know I'm sounding more wacky than even when I started.
You're in good company, don't worry.
Well, I'm just a guy. I'm not trying to be a world figure and be a big hero and so on, but I do want to do something useful with my life. And when I see somebody suffering, I want to help. And the more I looked at people suffering, the more I found this kind of stuff going on. So I can't turn away now. I just can't. And when you know this sort of thing can happen, and you go looking for it and you find it, it wears on you. And so I want to make people aware that now is the time to be skeptical of the leadership and the institutions and look in a deeper way at what's going on. Is this really the world we should be having? Because if you look at everything going on in society, it's pretty sorry. It's a pretty sorry mess. Look at the state of healthcare. It's so very limited in its focus. All on medicines. And they're not the be-all and end-all.
Right.
They're hugely destructive. And look at education. They can't hardly educate children with the limited objectives they have, reading, writing, and arithmetic anymore. It's just getting worse. And it's, of course, entirely divorced now from spirituality and morality, other than just the merest base level sense, the golden rule maybe they'll talk about. And it's sad. We've thrown the baby out with the bath. We created this huge so-called advanced education apparatus that teaches mostly useless information. It's an outdated paradigm based on the dilettantes in the Renaissance. They had nothing else to do but learn about philosophy and so on because they had wealth. And so now we're sort of on that same track, going and learning about all the arcane things and history and to no real useful purpose. And it's a huge money sink and a time waster and a lot of programming to keep us in the dark.
Right. From my research, mostly from Anthony Sutton and Elizabeth Iserbit, it's an educational system that was derived in pre-war Germany to create a subservient workforce. And so that was brought into the U.S. through the Chicago School of Education and the Rockefeller Foundations and whatnot to create a university system, to create an educational system to create a dumbed down mass of humanity to serve other purposes and consumerism, that kind of thing. And it's been very successful. And I don't call them public schools; I call them government schools. And it's another classic case of letting the fox into the hen house. The earlier colonial Americans were very much against any kind of government schools. They thought that was a ridiculous idea. And at some point in the East Coast, I know that they actually brought out the National Guard to force the parents to get the kids into the government schools. And then it was a hugely funded effort to just promulgate that idea that it was a right for public education, which actually was just a form of slavery. And that's all it was. That's its main purpose, and that purpose has just gotten more sophisticated over time. I think that's one of the reasons I never had children, because I recognized that pretty quickly, and I probably would have ended up in jail, because there's no way I would let any child of mine go to a public school. So and that's another area that's where awakening is occurring. There's so many parents now that are realizing that's the last place they want their children to be.
Well, and it's a good example of the shift in consciousness, because that awakening is allowing people to get in touch with their true spiritual nature, and then they see with new eyes, with fresh eyes, and they can see the negativity that it represents and how destructive it is.
Right.
And it's no accident. It is no accident. So I can easily sound like a guy with a tinfoil hat when I talk about these things. But the more you study this and see the influences going on, and you get into the level where it's actually operating mechanistically, there's no question that it's true and that it's real. This is all for a purpose. It's to hold us down and hold us back. It's the same with the financial system. Why has the U.S. dollar lost 95% of its value over the last 100 years? 95% of its value. Do they really not know what to do to create strong money? Are they really that stupid? That's the reigning paradigm, by the way, right now. If you look at the financial letters and things that are out there, those Fed people they're just clueless, blah, blah, blah. They keep making the same mistakes. They're using the wrong model. Well, wake up. Why do you think that is? Some of the smartest people are doing exactly the wrong things.
Right.
It's for a reason. It's to undermine us. And so...
Another question I had for you, Karl, sorry to interrupt, was the the brain drain that occurred, I guess starting maybe in the 50s and 60s and continuing on to the 80s, there's some claims of millions of people being, I guess, taken off planet to populate the what they call the space conglomerate. It's like a corporate space conglomerate where they've actually have off-world populations of humans working essentially as slave labor for these corporations that are serving intergalactic trade. And allegedly, there's millions of humans that don't live on Earth. Many of them think that the Earth is not inhabitable anymore, and their grandparents or great-grandparents were taken off planet with the promise of a better life because of impending doom on the Earth. Have you been exposed to any of that kind of information, or are you able to verify any of that from your experience?
Yes. And again, I hate to be so dark, but I believe this is true as well. And that's part of the goal of the genetic manipulation, to fine-tune and look for advantageous variants that would be more optimal for beings used and exploited in that fashion. Many people who have been taken have never returned, and that is one of the fates, one of the outcomes. So it's very, very sad. But many people's forebears are no longer here in the Earth plane itself. They're in another setting, another civilization. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge kind of karmic drama with many players, all of whom are contributing and functioning kind of on this fairly dark level or very dark level. And that's why it's a broad-based problem that needs a broad-based solution. Mm-hmm. Because if you beat it back on one front, there's so many other parts of the apparatus that can regenerate a similar program. They just wait a generation or two till people have forgotten about what happened, like with Atlantis. Mm-hmm. And then they're back at it. They're back in doing more manipulation and so on. So I think this is a large learning exercise and self-development exercise by the divine realm, so that those who navigate that experience successfully come away enriched with a much deeper and fuller understanding of the possibilities of negativity. Okay. This is a huge testing ground and experiencing of negativity in so many different manifestations. And the challenge for us is to keep our head above water.
Right.
Not everyone does, and many go down. And it doesn't mean it's not solvable or that they won't bounce back. They will reincarnate. But as I work with people and I see life after life with the same kinds of issues that they're struggling with, it's not an easy path by any means.
Right.
And all of us contain within ourselves lots of negative, limiting beliefs. It's the heritage. So this is how karma works. Karma is a really important subject. This should be starting in kindergarten. There should be discussions about karma and, with the law of cause and effect and on from there.
Right.
Because this is what is happening with all of these dark manipulations. There is a karmic debt attached. So these perpetrators are incurring a huge karmic wound to themselves that they're going to have to rebalance in some way. Mm-hmm. They're not going to get off the hook. It can't go on forever, although it could go on for an awfully long time.
Right.
The Anunnaki are still pecking at us 120,000 years later. So this is a long-term deal, but we're entering a period where there can be a frame shift to a higher level. And so we're at the cusp of something really huge that can catapult us forward. So part of my message for people is don't give up the ship, because most of this is happening because we're just being held in the dark. And we actually have the power for our own salvation. If we group together and think together alike and focus on what we want, we can turn this around and do it fairly quickly. And we do have help. We have other beings out there rooting for us, cheering us on, and the divine realm as well. But for the moment, this is being allowed to play out.
It's part of the healing.
It's part of the healing, yes. It's part of the healing. Because the rebalancing requires a certain bounce back to the perpetrator.
Right.
In some way.
And a lot of this is going to boil up so it can be, like I said, revealed and forgiven.
Yes.
If you can't forgive something unless you know about it. You have to know about it first.
Exactly.
So this kind of information that you're disclosing, the kind of information that Corey Good is disclosing, all of our personal stories around this stuff, including our own personal dramas, all of that stuff needs to come up to the surface, be exposed, shine the light on it, heal it, and then go on to the next thing. Because like you were saying earlier, there's many levels, many avenues where this kind of activity can occur relatively fast.
Yes.
And we just need to be willing to move into it. That's all it is.
Yes, that is a brilliant analysis, and I think it's spot on. I think it is the crux of what's needed, and it's beautiful because I know a lot about healing. This is what I do, and I've endeavored to learn as much as I can, and I do channeling of divine beings and so on with the quest to learn more. And they have taught me some of the advanced healing techniques that I use that I've incorporated in my protocol, one of which is a soul matrix healing that looks at all levels of influence on a person in all time domains. And one of the big take-home lessons that I learned along the way in all this is the best way to heal someone is to heal the perpetrators that contributed to their dilemma. It's kind of counterintuitive. You know, the person bleeding on the street, you go and you stop the hemorrhage and you splint the broken bone sticking through the skin, and then you go from there and you fight the infection afterward or whatever you might need to do, right?
Right.
But if you go back and you heal the person who decided to drink that day and ran over this other individual, that doesn't happen. That person gets healed in the bargain. And if the reason for that drinking is a karmic predisposition because they had past lives where they turned to alcohol for self-soothing because they were oppressed, and that's the only pleasure they had was to grow some grapes and make some wine and just kind of numb out. Healing the oppressor in that past life can undo that predisposition to become an alcoholic. You see how this works?
Yes.
So the same is true today with all these dark things we're discussing, the secret government and the corruption of our institutions and the negativity of running all through society at many levels. There is a karmic history behind it. This has been growing over long spans of time, and it's all part of our long, deep heritage. But we can begin healing those deep roots. And it can start with acts of forgiveness, because that's the power of forgiveness in healing the karmic underpinnings. We don't typically think of it that way. It seems kind of simple, forgive and forget, and a lot of people say, well, I can't do that, and they're probably right. They got too many grudges and resentments in their belief systems now, which is another story for maybe another topic. But the opportunity is there. If you heal the perpetrator, you heal the victim. So that's what's wrong, just in a very simple, mundane way, that's what's wrong with the criminal justice system.
Right.
We want to heal the victim and punish the perpetrator. And all that does is increases the potential for harm going forward. And I see this all the time. I mean, people who are involved in war come away with huge soul wounds. So another person I just did recently is someone who was a Marine, and he had huge soul wounds from his combat experiences. And in fact, he had 7 lost soul spirits of people he had killed in combat in the Middle East. When you kill someone in the field of battle, they may not go to the light. They may come and get inside you and continue to attack you as a spirit. Think about that one. This is what happens when we march out into other countries with our bombs and guns and drones and so on. We're creating huge karmic wounds that will eventually cycle back to us. And we're going to get slapped. Mm-hmm. It's the way karma operates. Yeah. Everything operates through the wheel of karma in our existing universe. It's one of the operating principles. And it's just like a force of nature. It's just like gravity. You throw a ball up in the air, and as you stand and look at it, it's going to come down and hit you right in the nose if you don't get out of the way. That's what karma does. So every good act and bad act both circle back around and reward or punish in some way, give people a taste of their own bad medicine that they've put out into the world. So,
right.
So the act of forgiveness, you see, can start to undo that karmic link and break that chain of action-reaction.
Right.
And start a whole new potential. And that's how you undo it. You see, it can be that simple to disconnect that link.
Right. So, I kind of see that as a take-home message from this, and I would really like to do another Skype interview with you at some point, maybe after we have some seminal event that's coming out more in the media, where we can see another evidence of these big changes that we both see coming. And I guess, back to what I had said earlier, I have this theme of reveal and forgive, and that being a way of opening up. And I also was curious to ask you, like what do you see happening over the next few months in terms of light worker consciousness and perhaps the common person out in the street in the workaday world, especially in the United States? Like, do you have like a feeling for in these tumultuous times, like a general direction that we might be kind of witnessing?
Well, I think the light is winning, but it is painfully slow for those of us who believe in this greater possibility. We all want it now,
right?
Understandably.
Right.
We're thirsty for change. I talk to so many people who want out. They just want to get out of here. And they're all convinced they're not ever going to come back.
Yeah.
But yet they have for hundreds of lifetimes, and many times leaving under worse circumstances and with more regret and more pain. So I am hopeful, but I've heard many messages like this with short timelines that never came to be. So again, not to be the ultimate wet blanket, I also know that there's a huge disinformation campaign going on amongst light workers. Light workers are not special people who are above the fray and free from the possibility of corruption because they're light workers. In fact, they're heavily targeted and they're heavily corrupted for that reason, because they're high-value targets.
Right.
There are many people I've worked on with big reputations, with a lot of visibility in the spiritual community. They may be healers at high levels and so on, and have lots of schools and trainings and lots of credibility as mentors and as gurus for the metaphysical. Mm-hmm. And they are heavily corrupted with spirit attachments, and they have karmic issues still rumbling that haven't been healed yet, because they're not going in and looking in the right way to see that they're there, presumably. Mm-hmm. How to do that, or their techniques that they've used haven't gotten to that depth, perhaps. But they're relentlessly targeted We all are. And so I think this is the reason for some of the disappointments, that this possibility has existed certainly since 2012 for a big shift. But we haven't really gotten the big shift yet.
Right.
And so I think the delay is in part the resistance that's being put up. They're redoubling the efforts on the dark side to try and slow this down, try and throw a monkey wrench in the works. So I hesitate to make any kind of timeline prediction here.
Yeah, right.
And, I want to, but I am positive. I think we're going to move forward. But we still need to work at this, and we need to do our part and do all we can. And so your work is so valuable in helping to help spread information in the communication of what's known about this and the possibilities, so people can start to think on this level.
Right.
That's a big part of it. Human consciousness is a force. And you get people thinking about it in unison, and miracles can happen.
Right.
Because that's what the divine realm needs to see. They need to see this is something we want and we're ready for. Okay. Until it happens, we're still back in the duality. We get what we are. We get more. Whatever we're reflecting out, we will get back. And if it's more suppression, we'll get more suppression for the time being.
Right.
So to shift that, we need to do something active. So that's the first message. There's pushback. The second thing I would say is a cautionary note. And again, I hate to be talking about something negative, but people need to understand there's lots of misinformation out there. There are a lot of channelers who are net channeling who they think they are. And these beings, many of them are extremely intelligent. They have the benefit of millennia of knowledge and information in their memory banks. We just have what we learned along the way in this short life we've lived so far.
Right.
We can't compete with them intellectually. They're smarter than we are because they have less downgrading. They're corrupted in terms of their morality. So they're connected to dark thoughts and disconnected from their spiritual origin to varying degrees, like we are in the earth plane as physical humans. But they're bright and they're devious. So they are sending a lot of false hope, misinformation about being rescued, and on and on and on.
Right.
You never can know for sure who you're talking to. I am telling you, I have channeled beings who told me they were archangels, who I subsequently found out were not. So there's no law against it.
Right.
There's no law against, in terms of the divine realm.
Right. You can listen to whoever you want to listen to.
Yes, and you can pretend to be whoever you want, and that being won't come in and stop it.
Right.
Because you're allowed to be a con man in the earth plane.
Right.
God won't stop that. So if you want to pretend you're Archangel Michael and talk to someone who's channeling and wants a divine voice, if you're a reptilian, you can do that.
Right.
Or a dark fallen spirit.
Right.
You can do that. Pretend to be an archangel and lead a person along. Give them happy talk and encouragement and spiritual guidance and wisdom and all sorts of wonderful knowledge about metaphysics and on and on and on and on. And then eventually they'll get you believing in yourself, that you're something special, and they'll start to work on that ego level a little bit. And it may be too late for you to back away because now you're convinced you've got something important to do, and you'll just keep babbling with stuff that's a little bit off the mark, but seemingly helpful.
Right. Yeah.
So there needs to be an action step in making change. Keep that in mind. Wishful thinking is fine. Thinking positively is fine. Raising your vibration is fine. Having hope, having expectations of good things to come, keeping a positive focus, it's all good. But it will not heal your deep subconscious conflicts, because that's a different part of your mind. And it will not have any influence on these dark forces. unless you target them specifically, unless you do specific things. You're just wanting a nice outing, and someone comes along and steals your kid and abducts them. What happened? You're going on a picnic. Maybe you're celebrating Easter and you have an Easter egg hunt out in the woods with the little kids and somebody gets snatched. Well, where's God? Well, God's watching, but we're in charge here. We have to safeguard our children and so on. So
right.
The ball is in our court still for the moment. The forces are gathering and they're cheering us on, but we can't let down our guard and we can't ignore our responsibilities and our potential to contribute to this, because I think it's very significant.
Right.
But what you're proposing, the idea of forgiveness, it's the sending of love in a sense, and that is the most powerful force in the universe. And this is one of the eye-opening things I've learned along the way, that it is love energy that makes things happen, and that is the essence of the divine. It's a love energy that animates everything. And this is why loving your enemy is so powerful. Because, number one, it disconnects you from the karmic ties through pain and suffering that otherwise keep you tied at the hip to your perpetrator. But then it also initiates a healing for the perpetrator. So they're less likely to do this in the future.
Right. That's a great take-home message, Karl. And I think, given that we've been talking for almost an hour and 40 minutes, I'm gonna bring this to a close now with a request to you that we do a follow-up at some point, because I know this information is so valuable, and you're so eloquent, and you've helped me personally, and I'm so glad to have met you and to have taken advantage of your services, because it's made a huge difference in my life. So.
Well, that's beautiful, and I so appreciate you and what you're about, and just to fully answer your kind of question earlier about sharing your story, I think that's up to you.
Yeah.
But I think it can be a contribution, and you see that personal testimony, I think, is the most persuasive. It tends to be, in my experience.
Right.
You can talk facts and figures all day long, and people's eyes glaze over.
Right.
It's profound knowledge, but a human story,
right,
great power.
Yeah, well, I've kind of committed to this idea of reveal and forgive, and I'm asking that of other people. And if I'm asking it of other people, then I certainly need to be willing to do it myself. And all of this stuff everywhere needs to come out into the open, into the light, so we can heal it and then move on. And it starts with each one of us to do that. So I really appreciate your contribution and you spending this time with me this morning. And so for that, blessings to you, and thank you so much for this interview.
Well, namaste, sir. I so appreciate you and what you're about. I think it's wonderful. And this is the dilemma for all who are on the front lines, not necessarily knowing or feeling they're part of a brotherhood or sisterhood. And to know others are out there with a similar intention is wonderful and is empowering across the board. So you're a beautiful hub to help link us together.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Karl. And we'll close now. And thanks, everybody, for watching. And we'll be back again. Bye-bye.